彩虹屁is a good one. So that's rainbow farts. And no one explains this clearly on the Chinese internet. But what it means is, well, how I've translated it is excessive online flattery of your favorite kind of idol or celebrity.
Andrew Methvin is the creator of the Slow Chinese Substack, which alongside Chaoyang Trap House and, well, China Talk's Substack newsletter, is my only other must-click China Substack. In this episode, Andrew will go through his top Mandarin words of 2021 and talk about his process for writing the newsletter. Andrew, welcome to China Talk.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, hit me.
Okay, so I've got 21 words in total, but I've condensed it even more down to just 10. And this is from more than 1,300 words that I looked at across the last year of doing the newsletter. So the first one, and most of these, by the way, were new to me so I learned them as I was writing. So the first one is it's a word called 杀熟, which is, if you translate it literally, it's killing your customers or killing the people that are most of you're familiar with. And what that is that over the last 6 months, particularly, companies like Didi and others, China's big tech firms, they were under pressure from regulators for using big data to basically leverage it in a way for them to charge their customers higher prices, their existing customers, and give their new customers better deals. So once a customer is in your system, they use big data to then identify how much more they can charge you as you go along.
So basically, like, if I am commuting to work every day using Didi, they know I'm probably going to use it the next day, and if they charge me 5 more kuai, it's not going to change my. I'm not particularly price sensitive, but this is interestingly something that the regulators took from just internet speak and start using when they describe these issues. This dynamic I found absolutely fascinating reading your newsletter, Andrew, how often and how quickly sort of internet language bleeds up into official party documents and speeches.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my other words, probably one of my favorites in this list actually, was originally a gaming word. And then that then came over into social media and then into kind of official rhetoric. So I've seen it happen quite a lot in my work over the last year.
Great. Let's do that word.
So that word is 代节奏, which you'll read it in Ministry of Foreign Affairs press statements and press, what are they called? 新闻官. So in Ministry of Foreign Affairs press statements, you often hear this phrase 代节奏, which is translated as pace setting or setting the pace. What it actually means in this context is leading people astray or leading the general public outside of China to think a certain thing about China. So this came from the computer game League of Legends, 英雄联盟, and it was used in gaming chat rooms between gamers, several years ago now, to talk about leading a good attack. And it then crossed over into social media and then eventually into kind of political rhetoric. And then it's also now used to complain about, for example, state-owned companies, if they're doing something against the interests of the public. So this is a word that's become really kind of mainstream, but it started its life in 2017, 18 in gaming chat rooms.
Yeah. Andrew, I don't know how much time you spend looking at Western slang, but it seems like the metabolism on the Chinese internet is much faster. Do you think that's a reasonable claim?
Yeah. So I've found that I think the Chinese language, again, this is just through this process, it changes so much. So I haven't been to China since 2019. And if I hadn't done this over the last year, kind of consuming content and learning about all the new phrases and how things are changing in meaning, then there's just so much you would not understand. So you've got the obvious ones like 内卷 and things like that, which have been around for a couple of years, or 凡尔赛, which is translated as Versailles literature, which means kind of humble bragging. So all these have come around or into use after 2019, 2020, after it's been much harder to get to China. So I totally agree. It's the way that language is used and changes is much faster in China than in the English language speaking world.
So let's before diving into more words, Andrew, why don't we take a step back and talk folks through what Slow Chinese is, why you started it, and what's your sort of process for finding and understanding these new words.
Sure. So I'll start with why I started it, which is really simple. It's a lockdown project. So I realized after kind of late 2020 that my Chinese was just getting so bad because I hadn't been to China. I was generally at home, kind of working at home, and so my Chinese was just getting really bad, and I got lazy, so I didn't really read that much. I just felt like it was just going more and more narrow in terms of the words I could actually use. And then also I just got frustrated with only reading English language news on China because I just wanted to have a bit more kind of color and texture as to not only what the stories are, but what's the language that's being used to talk about them. So I just decided to start every day, to read I spend an hour. So I get up early, read an hour of Chinese news. And I did that after doing that for a couple of months. I was just doing it to improve my Chinese and to be a bit more connected with what the news agenda is in China. And I realized that everything I read, pretty much every news article, there was always one or two things or lots of things that I had to look up. And I just realized that, when you get to a certain level in learning Chinese, you can just about read news articles. Sometimes it's really hard if they're very long. And even if you're really good and you've been learning for years and years, there's always like 1 or 2% of things that you have to, you never know everything in the article, or maybe you kind of get it, but you just skip over them or, just ignore them. So I started to just kind of read into the backstory of different idioms and colloquialisms and things like that. And then in February last year, February 2021, I just decided to start a Substack. So I then started to every week from February last year. So this is week 50.
Woo!
So yeah, 2 more weeks and it's 52.
Andrew, so let's start with their news consumption process. How do you find articles?
So a range of different ways. So I read a lot of English language news. So that's where I tend to start, just because it's really hard. I'm just in my kind of office shed. So I try to first pick up what the news agenda is in English. So then I go very quickly into Chinese news. So the media that I tend to go to in Chinese are Sohu is always quite good. Peng Pai She, the paper, is always good. There's a few really good WeChat accounts that I follow as well. So particularly for kind of more youth-related stories called DT. So that's more kind of youth culture, society. What is life like for, if you're like a 20-something person in Shanghai. So that's always really good. And then probably the one I read the most is 36KR, San Shiliu Ke. And that's great for like entrepreneurial type interviews and things like that, business news, investor news. So probably now the one I read the most is 36KR.
You come across a word that you don't understand, you just Baidu it and see what comes up. What's the process for investigating these words?
Yeah, I normally do that first. So first I'll check, is it in the dictionary? Then I'll Google it. And then if I still don't find anything, then I'll Baidu it. And then if it's kind of an established word, like say, for example, 沙鼠 or 带节奏 that we just talked about, or another kind of more slang type word, if it's already established within the kind of public discourse, then it will normally have a Baidu page. It might even have a video explainer, which is always quite good.
I love those video explainers.
I mean, some of them are really good. Others it's like they think you're a 12-year-old Chinese high school student.
Oh, those are my favorite ones, where it's like, where it's like some emperor or some like, not even emperor, but it's like the emperors usually have decent coverage. But once you get to like like random ministers from the 12th century or something, and it's like, they're just speaking like baby language to you. And I feel a little patronized, but like also appreciate
exactly,
it.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Well, this is part of what the newsletter does has evolved a little bit, but part of it is trying to package things in a way that isn't patronizing to a foreign learner of Chinese, because a lot of it's not in a textbook.
Yeah.
A lot of it, I think on some occasions, I'm like the first person to translate a word ever on the internet because some of it is so new. And it's just trying to find a way to explain it. But back to the process, occasionally I'll find something that I can't find on Baidu or anywhere else. And so in that situation, I then try and read into how it's being used.
Gotcha. Let's do a few more words and then we'll come back
Sure.
to the narrative. So,
Yeah.
all right. Next word, Andrew.
Next word. This is also one of my favorites. 罗生门,罗生门. So the English for this is, I've translated as Rashomon Affair. So this is a Japanese cult classic Japanese movie from the 1950s. And for some reason, I still haven't found out why, but calling something a Rashomon Affair, like a 罗生门, is a situation where there's lots of different versions of the truth. So this, I led this one when I was reading into do you remember the malfunctioning brakes protest at the Shanghai Auto Show for Tesla? I think it was in April. Yeah. So I learned this one reading into that story, and why it was called a Rashomon Affair was that, like the movie, the cult Japanese movie, there were every kind of actor in that situation was telling their version of the truth, which was different. And so that's used when there's some kind of situation or problem in the media where it looks like the person that's trying to defend their position, in this case it was Tesla, has a very different version of events to what everyone else is saying. In that particular instance, it was the protester on top of the car.
Gotcha.
Okay, I've got two idioms now, both really colourful. The first one is 屁滚尿流. So if you translate literally as farts rolling, piss flowing. So I translated this as market shitstorm. So this was an idiom that I saw a lot just after the double alleviation policy was announced. And so this idiom was used to describe the financial markets in the context of companies like New Oriental and the bigger kind of education firms whose Hong Kong stocks completely tanked. And it was a 屁滚尿流, a shitstorm. So that I've read that a lot this year. The next one is one you hear a lot in the kind of entrepreneurial kind of investor world. 跑马圈地, 跑马圈地. So that's running horses circling land. And again, there's no really good translation of this that I found, but what it means is kind of preemptive moves by investors or entrepreneurs into like a new sector. So, for example, I read this one. There's lots of stories this has been in this year, but the one I read, which came to mind, is do you remember Charles Liu, the founder of Luckin, who kind of went down and then came back? So anyway, Charles Liu started a new fast food brand that opened its first restaurant in Beijing, kind of in the middle of last year. Anyway, it was described in the press as 跑马圈地. So this kind of the kind of fast food but high quality, healthy kind of restaurant meal, but aimed at the kind of young consumer. So a really busy, energetic, quite difficult, lots of kind of punchy entrepreneurs making moves. So when you read a 跑马圈地, you know that it's like it's a sector that's very early in its development. There's lots of people buying into it, and there's probably going to be lots of kind of investors making bad investments and failing as well.
So, Andrew, let's go back to your taxonomy of what makes these words interesting, because not necessarily all of these are minted in the past 12 months.
No, definitely not. So what for me makes an interesting word, like one that goes into the newsletter? So normally it's either new to me, or I've learned something new about it, or there's some kind of point of interest there, or I know it's going to be interesting for a language learner. It's probably not in a textbook. So that's the first part. The second part is that they broadly fit into one of three categories. They're either old words that are now used in a completely different setting. So like a very old, it doesn't have to be very old. It could be, for example, an idiom that was used in the Cultural Revolution to mean one thing, which now is used to describe the online or the kind of social media atmosphere in China today. So it's changed over time, or like a warring states idiom, or something from the Han Dynasty that was about battles and death, which is now used to describe entrepreneurs making aggressive investments into kind of a sector. So that's one thing. The second thing is I found a lot of words change. So it's either to fit a particular agenda, like a political agenda. So I mentioned 代节奏 as the gaming word. So that's now used to explain or kind of make a political point. There's lots of dialect words that I've learned this over doing this. So particularly Northeastern dialect or slang words, they come up quite a lot. Probably actually one of my favorites from that, which I haven't put in my list, is the word 贼, which means thief or kind of, so that in Northeastern Chinese slang means extremely. So the same as 非常. So if you say 我贼开心, that means like I'm really happy. It doesn't mean I'm a happy criminal. They change the meaning. And then occasionally you get a foreign word that comes into China. So the Rashomon word that we just talked about. So that's a Japanese word. I found quite a few Japanese words actually. So that's the second category. The third category is completely new words. And you're right. A lot of the things that I find, they're not just new in 2021, but a lot of the words that I found, I think, are kind of within the last 1 year or 2 years. And as I said before, it just seems to change so much and so quickly. And then you get one word. So, for example, the word soin for bamboo shoots. That sounds the same as sun in sun, hai, to harm or to hurt. So this word soin, bamboo, is then used as a kind of a slang word on social media to mean to kind of harm or to be like over the top or to kind of be completely ridiculous, or like 多笋. So lots of bamboo becomes kind of very hurtful. But then you get things that evolve. So I found this thing called a 歇后语, which is like a Chinese version of a pun, which uses the slang, the new online slang 笋, in the context of this kind of new phrase. So they do change a lot. And those are the ones that no one knows about. Unless you're in China, you probably won't know what that means.
Yeah.
Whereas the other two categories, you can kind of guess them. If you're native Chinese or, you've grown up with China, you could probably guess them. I've actually found that I know quite a few people, Chinese people that live in the UK and the US that would also read this because, some of the meanings, particularly of the new ones, you don't necessarily know unless you've kind of read about them.
Andrew, let's do another politics one. What's some silly stuff that's come out of Xi's mouth over the past year?
So I've got two. So the first one, again, this is interesting because it's changed its meaning. So 温室里的花朵, so a flower in a greenhouse. That used to be used to describe a spoiled child who was kind of spoilt and grew up probably in like a single child household. I think in early 2020, this was then used to describe China's position on climate talks pre-COP26. And so what it now means in that context is it's used to say you can't treat the environment thing on its own. You can't treat that as a standalone issue. But I thought that was really interesting because something that's completely unrelated to that was just used in this situation. I think partly because it's got a flower in it. And so there's a link to the environment, maybe. I don't know.
Sure.
But that was an interesting one because of the change. And then, probably one of my favorites of all throughout the whole year is this didn't really come out of any kind of political leader's mouth, but it's used to criticize political leaders, which is 何不食肉糜, 何不食肉糜, which means let them eat meat porridge, which is a story that dates back to the Jin dynasty in the kind of 3rd and 4th centuries AD. So this is a kind of a classical tale of the then emperor who was being told by his people that the people was, his subjects were starving. And his response was to say, well, let them just eat meat porridge, which at that time, meat porridge was apparently a delicacy, something that only the very rich and privileged would eat. And so it's then come to mean, or it's come to be used to say, or to criticize a political leader that he or she is out of touch. And this one in particular, this came up in June last year when an NPC delegate was quoted as saying that I think he wanted to. Oh yeah, he wanted to promote a 3-year maternity leave for women. His intent was good. So in order to encourage to kind of give better policy support for women who have babies, so that in order to kind of support them. But that was basically totally derided on social media as being completely out of touch. And a lot of the social media comments I read into that came up a lot. 何不食肉糜
I guess we should just keep going.
Sure. So I've learned a surprising number of Chinese poems this year. Before I started doing this, poems to me, they were like, you might know a poem or do a poem if you're kind of at some kind of really boozy dinner and it's about drinking and friendship and all this. But I've noticed that poems in my reading, tend to come up when there's a really kind of strong political message. So that I found that poems like a dufu is used a lot to make a political message. So one this came up in April. So often you get like 1 or 2 lines of a poem that are said to make the point, and everyone in the Chinese audience completely gets it, but any international reader or listener wouldn't. So the one I've picked for my list is 朱门酒肉臭，路有冻死骨, which is from a Dufu poem, and the translation is: behind the vermilion gates of the rich, meat and wine go to waste. Along the road are bones of the poor who are frozen to death. And this is used in this kind of political context to call someone patronizing or out of touch or hypocritical. And this one in particular was used by the MFA spokesman when questioned about China's kind of vaccine diplomacy, kind of rolling out Chinese vaccines to the world. And her position was, we're doing a lot more than you, why are you being so hypocritical? And she used this poem to make the point.
This episode is not sponsored content, but Andrew, I would like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about you going, you standing up a paid version for this year.
So this is a big moment for me, and I'm really excited about it. I've spent quite a lot of time trying to create something that is really useful for me. So I'm the target user or the target reader for the newsletter. And as I've been doing it, I've realized there's an opportunity to create the content or repackage the content as a resource for language learners. And so the paid version is, the newsletter is the same. It's not going to change and it will always be free. But I've taken the content and I'm doing 3 things with it. First is I do an audio version. So on Substack, you can do an audio kind of attack, like an audio file that goes with the newsletter. That's the first thing. The second thing is Pleco downloads, which I already do actually. And then the third thing, which is, for me, I think this is the coolest thing. I've taken all of the words and example sentences and I've kind of put them into a database, an online database, that if you remember, you get access to this. So then each word is a standalone entry that you can then access. You've got the example sentence, you've got the categorization of it, you've got context and background notes, and then also there's an audio file as well. So there's a kind of native audio file for each of the example sentences.
And can that database be like jacked into Pleco relatively easily?
So I don't know. So I've got Pleco, no problem. I do. So all my words every week go into Hack Chinese, which I think is similar to Anki.
Andrew, take us home. What are our final few words?
Final few words. Okay. So let me do a few. So 吃人血馒头, 吃人血馒头. So this is eating human blood-soaked buns. This is, you read this is probably one of the most kind of common things that I see this all the time. And so what this means is normally it's companies or kind of entrepreneurs or companies that are using people's misfortune for their own commercial gain. And so where I first read about this was, do you remember the Zhengzhou floods last year? So there was 1 or 2 companies that used it as an opportunity to advertise for in this case, it was a real estate company. And I see this come up a lot. Its source, I only learned recently, is actually from Luckin. And then apparently it's also, as I've read, eating human blood-soaked steamed buns is also a Chinese medicine thing as well. So that was one of my favorites from the year. I've got a few more.
Yeah.
Okay. 露马脚,露马脚. So this is expose the horse hoof. This means show your true colors or let the cat out of the bag. Yeah, I actually couldn't work out this story because there was several different versions of it. This is one of those things where no one explained it clearly why it means what it means. But 露马脚, it means show your true colors.
And what was the context?
Oh, the context was news story Lin Shenbin, who I think back in 2017 became not an internet celebrity, but he became famous because his family were killed by their kind of live-in helper, and then last year he then announced that he'd had a new wife and was having a baby with her. And China's netizens were not so happy about that. And they thought that he had finally shown his true colors, or as the word says, shown his hooves.
I want to make sure we get to rainbow farts.
So I've got two more internet words. So the cool thing about internet words is that unless you've heard them before, you're probably not going to know them. So 彩虹屁 is a good one. So that's rainbow farts. And no one explains this clearly on the Chinese internet. But what it means is, well, how I've translated it is excessive online flattery of your favorite kind of idol or celebrity. And this is the context is in November last year, the China's regulator, internet regulator, published rules for stopping unfair internet competition in the internet sector. And 彩虹屁 is rainbow farts was one thing that I read into that story, that there's just this the kind of online culture. This is one of the issues that the regulators had identified, rainbow farts. The other good one, which is 危机四伏, which is an idiom, 危机四伏, which I think is crisis on all sides. But they changed, so it's now been changed to 危 as in via, 危呀, 危机四伏. So they've taken the 危, which was crisis in the idiom, and then replaced it with Via's name, Wei Ya, Wei, to mean that like she's everywhere and just got so big. This was before she was done for tax evasion. But then you see the news and you're like, the tax thing, and you think, maybe there's something more to this idiom than just, what the netizens say. Maybe this was kind of fed into the narrative intentionally to make it, to kind of fulfill what was going to happen anyway. And then the other one is 骑虎难下, 骑虎难下. The first character, Qi, is from Li Jiaqi, the other kind of big kind of live stream e-commerce. Yeah.
Ko Hong, the lipstick selling guy.
Yeah, the lipstick guy. Yeah. Austin Lee. When I read it, it was meant in a positive way. But again, you look at that now and you think, well, this is the year of the tiger. Via has been done for tax evasion, and her idiom was 危机四伏, there's crisis everywhere. And then Austin Lee's idiom is 骑虎难下, which, as you know, is kind of riding the tiger and hard to get off. So I just think that's really interesting, where you've got these idioms that are invented to mean one thing, but then you see events unfold and then they kind of...
Yeah, maybe it's a sort of leading indicator where if you're hot enough to get your own chengyu for yourself, then you're
you're too hot.
You got to back off a little bit.
I've got a couple more if we have time. Normally idioms or colloquialisms that are from the deep past in China. So there's like an agricultural kind of slant to it. It's from a time in China when everyone lived in the countryside, or it's about war and death and battles. So I've got two, both with an agricultural kind of theme, but they were used in a very modern context. So the first one is 三天打鱼两天晒网. 三天打鱼两天晒网. So 3 days fishing, 2 days drying your nets. One of my kind of favorite topics is reading about kind of young Chinese working in the kind of 996 working situations. And I read a lot about people going for kind of creating their own side hustles. And this is the way that it was talked about. So 三天打鱼两天晒网, which means, you do your kind of day job for 3 days, and then you do your side hustle for a day or two every week. And then the other one, which is a colloquial phrase, is 一粒老鼠屎坏了一锅粥. 一粒老鼠屎坏了一锅粥. One rat shit ruined the pot of porridge. And this one were related to a story in June where, I don't know if you remember, a student in Hebei used the kind of app, the question app, to look up the answers to his maths test. This was during the kind of Gaokao period. Anyway, that was he was described as a rat shit. That and then then later on, you then saw that later in the year, apps like it was Little Monkey Search Questions was the name of that app. This trend became bigger and bigger towards the end of last year. Another good one, Pomslet. So one thing that I've noticed, particularly on social media, is the stories of individuals can get really big, really quick. And so one story that happened last year in June was a man in Shenzhen, in 2 Haidilao restaurants in Shenzhen, took a cockroach into a restaurant and put it in his hot pot and then complained to the restaurant that there was a cockroach in his soup. And so he did that twice. And that became really big on social media. And it was described as Pomslet, which is, the way I translated that is, you fake an accident to claim compensation. But in other words, you're using it to extort someone else out of money. And that dates back to the late Qing dynasty. The then kind of military organization called the Eight Banners Brothers used to do that. So they would carry these enormous kind of china pots on a cart, and then they'd look out for people that weren't looking where they were going and then bump into them and then blame them for knocking off this. Another one, this really is a new word from 2021, Fo Yuan. So Fo as in Buddhist, Yuan is, so the word that you might know is Ming Yuan. So Ming Yuan is like a notable or kind of a respected female celebrity, Ming Yuan. But then this word Yuan has then become like a pejorative word to kind of criticize normally quite young women who are active on social media and then tell one story on social media, but actually it's completely fake. So Fo Yuan, which I translated as fake Buddhist socialites. It's not only women either. So you saw a number of male celebrities too, which would take pictures of themselves on the Great Wall or at a Buddhist kind of monastery, and then, kind of publish it on social media. And so that became one trend that was definitely not liked. But then you saw others come up which use this word yuan. So 支教yuan, which was, 支教 is like volunteer teacher. So there was one story in particular, I can't remember the name of her, but a kind of a youngish woman who was a volunteer teacher in the countryside in China for years. And then it turned out that she was actually a total fake. And so this word I've seen used a lot, yuan, which is like kind of socialite, but used in a very negative sense.
It's not a particularly forgiving place out there, Chinese social media.
Some things are really toxic. The comedian Yang Li, who did the 男人普通却这么有自信. So why are men so confident or overconfident and yet so average? So for some reason, she just incites this kind of real toxic kind of hate on social media from clearly very misogynistic men. I don't read into that kind of stuff because it's just so negative. This Fo Yuan, you could see that there's this kind of misogynistic kind of undertones going into some of the online commentary. But why I thought this was interesting is that you have a word that used to be like really positive, and then it's being completely repurposed and used online in a almost entirely opposite situation where it's then used to criticize people.
All right, let's close on something a little more positive.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, they're not that positive, are they?
Okay. Or real doom and gloom.
Oh, good one. Okay, so this favorite idiom from last year, 昙花一现, 昙花一现, which is the queen of the night flower blossoms fleetingly. So queen of the night flower is a cactus flower that only flowers once a year and for only one night. And it's actually indigenous to Mexico, but for some reason it was imported into China in the 16th century. And then this idiom, I think since then became like an idiom that was used, 昙花一现, and it means fleeting or a flash in the pan. You see this a lot in commentary, particularly of online stories. I read this one when Clubhouse was online like for about 2 days in China last year. And it was the idiom that was used to describe Clubhouse's kind of fleeting appearance in China was this one, 昙花一现, which I think is a good one.
Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your words today. Everyone go check out Slow Chinese. Just Google Slow Chinese Substack and get a lovely dose of 20 some odd words you probably don't know, which I found to be just a fantastic way to both keep up with the news, send interesting stories your way, and sort of boost your vocabulary in the most entertaining way possible. So, Andrew, thank you for all you do. And thanks so much for being a part of China.
Thanks so much, John. Thank you for having me.
你已经什么都有了，你要怎么愤怒？早就已经没有酒了，你被微醺困住。你已经如此幸运，还有什么好抱怨的呢？你已经把头低下，他们说你还欠他一句道歉呢。已经没这么好玩，该怎么幽默？没种就捏把自己搞完，反正曾经求过，曾经是最纯种的野兽，为何做困兽之斗？我把自己都给解剖了，场面就要失控。你到底想要什么？你又在害怕什么？你总是不停的战斗，你这次为谁而活？别再去哭，狗我哭，口婆辛苦着说那些都不是我，衣服越穿越贵，却越觉得赤裸。风吹，现在在吹着什么 ？Hip-hop 没有派对，录什么全都变成 Dr. Dre。风吹，现在在吹着什么？早就没有派对，现在比谁更窝囊，谁更废。风吹，现在在吹着什么 ？Hip-hop 没有派对，我代表老学校的败类。Hip-hop 大风吹，现在在吹着什么？早就没有派对，现在比谁更窝囊，谁更废。键盘会杀人，现在给你一首歌的时间来杀我，我死气沉沉，早就要死不活，用你的鞭子来抽查我。都打我，都打我，都打我，别打他。最残忍的是妈宝哭着回家找不到妈妈。请问八加九怎么了吗？男生像女生爱玩，扮家家酒怎么了吗？靠自己爱的事情赚大钱又怎么了吗？来自街头的艺术家到底是什么鸟？是折磨着他？怎么 make flow 都一样，他们都一样。上街上的女孩子，她们长得多像。Holy shit！ 我像只偷科学在 talking 学，你到底活在现实还在梦里面？风吹，现在在吹着什么 ？Hip-hop 没有派对，录什么全都变成 Dr. Dre。风吹，现在在吹着什么？早就没有派对，现在比谁更窝囊，谁更废。风吹，现在在吹着什么？Hip-hop 没有派对，我代表老学校的败类。Hip-hop 大风吹，现在在吹着什么？早就没有派对，现在比谁更窝囊，谁更废。派对呢？派对呢？派对说好的派对呢？再会了没呢？为何只来了派克特？我业余自己不懂你的心，业余的全部滚回去懂你的音。没有派对，那这局要怎么拼？消失的押韵怎么全部都变成哆来咪？加 Auto Two， 我上来学会欧洲步，用你的方式来击败你，去旁边偷偷哭，哈哈，中了透，通通球的像中了透，管他这风要怎么吹，有种风格叫热狗。大风吹，现在在